trocha technických.
So, a little bit of technical issues. Anyway, good evening, dear friends. My name is Eva Šafránova. I'm the Executive Director of the TOPAZ think tank, and I would like to welcome you all here in the Václav Havel Library and also those of you who are connected online. Welcome to our tonight's debate. I'm very glad that we can have our discussion in the Library of Václav Havel that celebrates 25 years of its existence this year. Karel Schwarzenberg was one of the founding members, and he was also the founding member of our institute. Yesterday, it's been a year after he died, and I think his place has been empty since then, and I think we all miss him at the political scene. However, I believe that his legacy lives on, not only in diplomacy, but also in the sector of human rights and Czech policy. Ignorance is the mother of dictatorship. These were his words, and we try to. That's why we plan our events. One of those events is tonight's event, and I would like to devote it to the memory of Karel Schwarzenberg, who, through his humanship, is written deep in our hearts. I'd also like to thank you all for your interest in democracy, in public life, and for not being ignorant. Thank you, and I would like to give the floor to the moderator of this evening, Lucie Tungul.
Děkuji.
Thank you. I would also like to welcome you. My name is Lucia Tungul, and I've been working at the TOPAZ Institute. I'm also the director of the Executive Committee of TOPAZ. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your interest. This week we will be celebrating 35 years from the Velvet Revolution. And I think that together we all perceive that there are many threats for our democracy. We could hear already that this is also the sad anniversary of the death of Karel Schwarzenberg. He was one of the people contributing to the Czech Republic being the member of NATO and the EU. He also strengthened the cooperation with our neighboring countries, with our significant partners, Austria and Germany. And that was one of the topics that we wanted to highlight at this occasion. Possibilities of cooperation, possibilities of building deeper relationships. I would like to welcome our distinguished guests. I would like to welcome the Minister, Marek Ženíšek, who is at the same time director of the Political Institute TOPAZ. Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. Before, he was also the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Czech Parliament, where he contributed to deepening the relationships to our neighboring countries. Further, I would like to welcome Mr. Wolfgang Sobotka, who is an Austrian politician who, until October this year, was the president of the lower house of the Austrian parliament. Today he is the president of the Political Academy of the Austrian People's Party. Welcome. Our further guest is Petr Hefele, who is an expert on political, economic, social development. He is the Martens Centre's policy director. He's been in the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. He's an expert on China. He's also a political analytic, and he will provide his point of view not only from the European point of view, but also from the German point of view. Welcome. And our fourth speaker is Professor Ladislav Cabada. He's from the Metropolitan University Prague. Thank you for accepting our invitation. He is a professor of politics and Czechoslovak and Czech history. He is also active in political studies, active in Ljubljana, Budapest. For a long time, he has been devoted to the questions of populism, political parties, and democracy in the Central European region in general. Welcome. Before giving the floor to our speakers, I would like to introduce the concept so that you know what to expect. At the beginning of our discussion, we will first have the introduction of the main topics. It means threats to democracy in our region. Subsequently, the speakers will each get some questions from me, but you, as the audience, will also have your space and time to ask questions. So you will also be interacting today. There will be time for you to ask your questions after our introductory part. If you need interpretation, our guests, foreign guests, will talk in English. So if you need translation into Czech, you can take the headsets, and then Channel 6 is Czech and Channel 5 is English. You can just raise your hand if you need a headset to hear the interpretation. And if you have any questions, then please always wait for the microphone, because the discussion is also streamed and we need you to talk directly into the microphone. Otherwise, we couldn't hear you and those connected on stream couldn't hear you. So please always raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and then you can ask your question. So that was the housekeeping announcements. And now we can start with the main part of tonight's discussion, which is the event concerning the question whether the democracy in Central Europe is resilient or whether it's toothless. So I would like to ask you for your introductory speech. Thank you very much. A lovely evening to all of you. I think that we will come across further topics connected to what you have now outlaid. That will be the topic of our discussion. In a few sentences, I would like to focus on what I think is part of the problem, which is the growing populism, not only in the Czech Republic, but across Europe and across the whole democratic world, in fact, if I may call it like that. I think that for most of you, there is no need to define which entities or what does it mean according to political definitions? What does populism and populistic mean? For our colleagues from abroad, although I know that they know it, we are talking about some parties which are also part of the Czech parliament. Some of them even boast about being populist because they define it as listening to the people and so coming with solutions according to what people want. That's the case of the biggest political party or movement. But why am I saying it? In one of the political parties, and now I'm referring to Motoristé or Přísaha, so they succeeded in showing during the European Parliament election, we could see that the European idea they interpreting was that the European idea is something threatening the people. Every citizen will be banned from using an internal combustion engine. They use it for 10 years and more. They repair it in their garage, and now the Europe would take it from them. Why am I mentioning this example? I am convinced that the growth of populism or the success of populism always, when somebody wins, it's not because themselves are so great, but it's because the other party is doing something wrong. Because you always need to have at least two people, to have one winner and one loser. And now it means I'm also referring to our political scene, but also to the political scene across Europe. And I'm asking myself for a long time. I'm a politologist, and Professor Cabada is also a professor of political science. And he was the one bringing me to political science some 25 years ago. So I think that he can remember my beginnings. But I think this is what he defines in the correct way. For populism, you always need a space and two sides, the one enabling the others to come up with a quick and easy solution and being implemented. In Europe, we are quite well off in comparison with the rest of the world. That's a fact, and we cannot doubt it. Still, some entities, some parties succeed in convincing people that it is not the case and that something significant must change and that they need to challenge the whole system that has been built up here. That's why I often say that these parties, who are a competition to us, political parties of a different type, that we ourselves give them the space. We give them too much of a space. And too often, but I think this is quite common. It's been always the case across all the political systems. If you are in a good situation, then you have parties which might be designed as populistic, or if there are some problems, they offer easy and quick solutions. That's not the problem as such, and I think that our next generation and the generation after it will have these problems as well. But what I see as a threat or a problem, we, and now mean the whole Europe, we are not able to admit our problems. We are not able to call them the right name and to explain them to the electorate. And that's the beginning of the populism in its pure form, populism that comes up with quick and easy solutions, and they want to deny the whole decade of the system built up. That's where I see a huge problem. And I can see that not always we are successful in facing these troubles, not only in the Czech Republic. We have shown that this can be defeated in democratic elections and that we can succeed. But I can see it as a problem for the future as well. And quite often I can see particular examples that really illustrate the situation and what we perceive as something suspicious or untrustworthy. What I mean now, such an abbreviation. Europe wants to save the world, save the planet, with its steps that it's doing now. But on the other hand, we show to our people that Europe is not even able to solve one single issue, like one country being attacked by another country. So we want to save the planet, but we are not able to solve the situation in one country which is under attack of an aggressor. China is a huge problem. We all say it now in Europe. But in the second sentence, we keep saying how strongly and how well we can cooperate with China, for example, in the industrial sector or business. And this is, I think, where a sort of moment of trust begins. Are we trustworthy in what we do? And in its pure form, I sometimes hear the opinions that we are not able to offer to the public the feeling of victory. And that's what the populists offer, an immediate feeling of victory. They know that it's not easy to tackle such a solution, so at least they give a manual in the hand of those voters and they tell them, if this happens, you will be well off, and if this happens, it will be correct, you will be happy, you will be part of the winning team that we represent. And I think that this is a huge problem, and we can see it, or I can see it, for example, in Ukraine. In the long term, we will be losing support for Ukraine because it takes a long time already. But it's not such a big problem that it takes time, because it always takes time. But we are not offering a final solution. the political parties of our type, or of the type which is not populistic, so we are not to use the same methods of populists. No, never. Because if we were to do it, then we would be defeated, because they have much more experience in doing it, in lying, in telling things which cannot be implemented, but still they inspire their voters by it. And we must be aware that without a clear leadership in Europe, but also on the individual national scenes, we are not able to compete. Why are they looking for a strong leader? And sometimes they find a strong leader in politicians that we couldn't imagine it some years ago. Why are they doing it? Because they lack a personality like that. In tough times, when there are many problems all around us in the whole world, they need a clear leader to tell them what the solution would be, even if it would be complicated. And without being able to name the things, to call a spade, and without playing the game of, yes, China is a problem, but, or yes, Russia is the aggressor, but we do not want to escalate it. So then not even our voters would be able to believe us. And I'm saying it quite openly. I think that we can see it also in many cases that it is true. And then, of course, what plays a key role in the long term, to be able to survive, to succeed, and not to be threatened by a danger, which I think is populism. So it's the necessary support to independent media, to public society, to citizen society, and the support to democratic institutions and the trust in these institutions. That would be all as in way of introduction, and then I believe we will have space in the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. It has been a lot of important aspects in a very brief period of time. We have been following the Austrian election recently very closely, and that is why I would like to ask Mr. Sobotka to evaluate the situation in Austria.
Before I come to answer your question, I want to underline what the Minister said, and I agree totally with him. But ask me, why are the populists so successful? And it's not only in Austria. It's when you look to elections in Thüringen, like in Brandenburg or in Saxony, or as well in France, Germany, Netherlands area in Europe. And I think, let me draw a little bit more holistic picture. Because when I think about what's the reason about, why it is possible that they are so successful, I see that we have since more than 40 years so-called political idea, postmodernism. And what is really the key issue of postmodernism? There's no truth. Truth is relative. Until the end of the discussions, there is no truth. And this intellectual idea came from America, and you see it all in our universities, you see it all in our societies. Mostly undercover. It's not really clear in the surface of the discussions. And then you have the movement of the left, the wokeness, that catch up the individualities. And on the right side, you have the national populists. We see it very clear. They're more outspoken and very clear. And then you have, especially in Austria, the political Islam. It's really a threat for us and for the democracy. And when you see that the different interviews in Germany to proclaim a caliphate in Hamburg, and as well to change our majority. And then you have the unregulated platforms. I think we have not only 4 powers in the state, the 3 we know, the 4th is the press and the medias, and the 5th are the unregulated, the social medias. I think that's really, and when you see this whole picture, it's really a cocktail, it's really a toxic cocktail what we have for us. And therefore you see that the populists have a very simple, a single issue policy. They address a special auditorium. They address it always in the same way. They have their bubbles. They have their own press. When they look, and that was the explanation for the result of the election in Austria. The FPÖ, the right-wing party, has his own TV. And Auf, one, has about 900,000 vouchers. And they don't take care about the public broadcast. That's not necessary for them. They have their own TV. They have followers in TikTok, Instagram, and all the social medias. In a broadness we don't take care in the past. Now we see it very clear. And when you see how people react, the brain research of the Nymphenburg group in Munich brought the result in the beginning of the 21st century. They divided the brain in 7 regions, and more of the half of our people don't like a change. They are afraid about change. The change process, because the world is so complex, and when anything or a little thing is changed in their surrounding, in their personal living situation, they are totally afraid. And therefore, they address them that somebody has to be guilty for this change, for the situation that it's not so good for them, that you have to arrange them more. And to look for a guilty person, it's mostly it's the EU it's guilty, or it's the regional government, the mayor, or it's the federal government. They always have to look for a guilty person institution. And so they address it very clear. Complex structures, and we are really too complex. When you look from the EU to our federal levels, people, when you look at our economy, it's for them to make the business really in a correct way. It's quite too hard. So many reports, so many regulations, so many restrictions. And therefore, people are not really trust in the solutions what we offer them from the government and the parties. Therefore, they look for simple answers. And you see it, and when you make the analysis, how a populist party is organized, you will find always the same items. His authoritarian organized. It's one leader. In Austria, it was called the Volkskanzler. You know, he addressed in this time the ancient times of Hitler. Hitler was also named the Volkskanzler. He addressed always the medias. These are the system medias. All the medias are against them. It's always the position we against the rest of the world. So that we have, that you are a victim, that you can identify. You're not alone as a victim, and to have a group of victims, and so on. And we can discuss it in detail then afterwards, but I think we have to see first the whole picture, what has happened in our society in an intellectual way. When you look in the universities and what is really attacking democracy, then it is, in my opinion, there are 2 main issues. It's one on the hand, the unregulated platforms. You can say everything on the platforms. The truth is not divided. Truth is truth. For each one is another truth. And that's the result of postmodernism. And therefore you have to really this difficulty when you negotiate under different parties. We are now in the situation to act for a coalition and to negotiate for a coalition, to find a common meaning about the fact. It's not really clear that's a bottle of water. They said, well, could be. And that's for us the main reason. And then you have a lot of influences. And therefore the national populists have really an easy doing. But also, when you look at the situation in Germany, Peter, you can be more clear. The division to that's right and that's left, it's not correct. Sarah Wagenknecht is on one hand total left in their social policy, in their international policy is total right. That this simple coordinates that we had before, that we had a clear decision between the right wing and the left wing, it's not really in the function now. And that's also a special moment, and therefore I think our liberal democracy, and you see it, we have only more than 46 states are they really called as a fulfilled liberal democracy. And that's what to fight for. We have to fight on many situations and many fronts.
Děkuji. Pan Sobotka správně.
Mr. Sobotka mentioned very correctly that this is a challenge for many European countries. Now I would like to ask Mr. Hefele, this is the year of the European elections. The German coalition has collapsed, and there will be early election. So, could you give us your opinion on these matters from the German perspective?
Your organization, TOPAZ, as well as our friends from Austria, Pollack, it's a marvelous cooperation, and I really appreciate these tripartite things. I think that is the true spirit of European thinking and our organizations, and we are glad to be the umbrella organization of many political foundations here in Europe. That's exactly what we always want to support. Well, Lucy, you asked me to tackle two topics. One is the European point of view, and this is why our center is invited, and the other is indeed Germany. And I think you couldn't find a better time to ask this, because only a couple of days ago we had not finally some clear and some truth about indeed that there will be new elections in late February and hopefully a new government, which is long overdue. So I have two hats on my head. That is the European one and the German one. Let me start a bit with the German issue. You both described general developments and commonalities in terms of populism. That is completely true, but if we look into how to counter these issues, we have to have a bit more precise view on the local conditions, because dynamics, I can compare a lot of European countries in my position, are quite different. And you look, for example, to the Nordic countries where we almost marginalized radical right-wing populism. I'm not speaking about the left-wing, only later. But in others we did not succeed. So we have to look a bit more precisely into the constitutional settings, the social economic conditions, and indeed to design strategies on that issue. In Germany, I would like to, or for the case of Germany, I would like to mention only 3 points. First of all, well, not only you are celebrating for 35 years of toning down the dictatorship. The fall of the wall was exactly these days, 35 years ago. Surprisingly, there was not much debate and celebration in Germany. So we just talked about in the beginning, apparently Germans have a problem with the issues of liberty. So this is not what they highly esteem. So in other countries, I think there would be a different kind of commemorating of this fundamental change, which indeed changed Europe and the world very much. But if you look into political culture these days, you think you are 35 years back in history. We have a hugely divided political landscape. The last elections on the European level showed a divided Germany exactly along the old west-east border. That is quite shocking, and we have apparently underestimated the development of different political cultures in East and West. It has to do, of course, with very practical issues. Wolfgang, you mentioned organizational issues. The parties are no longer really present, in particular centrist moderate parties on the ground. That gave space to others, and they filled it very efficiently. It has massive consequences. For example, in your neighboring country in Saxony or in Thuringia, we are now in a situation that we are in a constitutional dilemma because we are not able to form any kind of majority government, which is a really new situation for Germany, always seeking for stability. But maybe this is a kind of new normal we are heading. And in the worst case, we are alienating people more from our political system because they see it as a kind of proof that the current system is apparently not providing stability and solutions. So this is a very dire situation and maybe a destabilizing movement we have just seen on the federal state level. Let's see what will happen in February on the national level, where I still believe we might forge a comparatively stable government. And Wolfgang, you correctly pointed out, we should not always look only on the right side. With the rise of the BSW in Germany, we have seen a new phenomenon. In other countries we had it before, by the way, but for Germany this is quite new because it shows that the old left is dead and there's a new leftist populist party on the rise. Maybe not in style, but at least in content. That is absolutely crucial and attacking some fundamental issues, for example, our European integration, transatlantic relationship. So this is a real threat, and it's a massive entry point also for malign external forces, as we call it, for Russian propaganda, Chinese and others. There is more at stake than just domestic issues, because we are opening our societies to influence we would not like to have. In terms of how to counter, and that was one of the questions, Lucy, you had, well, yes, we have to address major issues, and that is, for example, migration, that is economic competitiveness, it's social opportunities, giving you, these are crucial issues, and these are really across Europe, that's one of the common denominator. And we should address young people, because if you look into the statistics of elections, young people, and particularly young men, are very much drifting to the radical sides, and this is a generational challenge we should address very much. Let me now share some light on the developments on the European level. Some are quite familiar, others is a bit different, and yes, one of the issues we are constantly facing on the European level is the issue of representation. Minister, you mentioned that is a structural challenge we have because we have so many different political levels in Europe that people get really confused who is really in charge, of who is responsible, who can act accordingly. So, and in the very end, it's mostly Europe which is accused, even it's correct or not. I leave it. Yes, I mentioned also the influence of foreign political forces, which we should never underestimate. This is a new quality of interference we had not 10 or 15 years ago. It is using these kind of spaces, Wolfgang, you described, in these unregulated issues. All the attempts we had to counter had started, yes, but not very efficiently, and they are not very well coordinated between nations and the European level. We have European parties, and I'm representing the largest political party here, but, well, creating our networks in Europe is a daily challenge, and apparently our enemies are much faster in connecting transporter issues. That is a point Europe has to address, absolutely. And yes, if we talk about Europe, what are we really talking about? We have to make clear in a much more convincing way what is the special value, the value add of Europe. Because some of the forces say, oh, we need simply more Europe. This is really stupid, I must say, because this exactly enhances rather Eurosceptical voices than precisely defining what can do Europe better and what we have to leave or give back to the national level and also to the regional and local level, because we have 4 levels in Europe, which we often forget. So more Europe is not definitely always better Europe. We have to really reflect what is the specifics Europe can do much better. This is not getting easier in the upcoming years, because if you remember the election results of June for the European Parliament, we have now 2 new political groups on the right, which are outright Eurosceptic to a large extent. Luckily, there's still a constant and massive bloc in the center, which is very much pro-European. And so we have a window of opportunity for the next years to really do our homework. That means really explaining people what Europe can do better and what spaces others have to fill. And Wolfgang, you pointed out, that's not just politics. It's media, it's social society, civil society. A lot of forces we have to better combine. With this, I leave it. I think there's a lot of issues we have to tackle later on. Thank you.
Děkuji. Děkuji. Toto setkání.
Thank you. Thank you. This event, this discussion is one of the outputs of cooperation between these three institutes, and I would like to say again that part of the cooperation is also a joint publication that's been published this spring with the introduction by the minister, and authors are Mr. Cabada, Mr. Hefele, and it's also with the topic of regional security. Professor Cabada devotes then his articles to Czech-German relationships, and then there are also external tendencies to influence democracy from authoritative regimes. So the publication is here at your disposal, and if you follow us online, you can also download it from the website of our institute. So it's another follow-up to the topics that we've been tackling this whole year, and we will also continue in talking about these important topics. So you can look forward to it, forward to our next World of the Book, so that's an event where we will also present our next cooperation. Now I would like to ask Mr. Cabada. We talked about the importance of academia, of the responsibility of our public and also of the intellectual sphere, and I would like to ask him to provide us with his point of view of these issues. Thank you. A good evening to all of you. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to thank the minister for his nice words. It's always kind when students, former students, are happy to see their professor. It's been such a long time. I know that we both look young, but it's been a long time. Mr. Sobotka could be also a teacher of political science. Well, I would like to touch upon some topics or elaborate on some topics that have not been described in detail. I would like to start with political culture. Mr. Hefele started to talk about it. Political culture is the key foundation for the operation of political institutions, be it citizen structure, being political parties, institutions that are connected to parties, ideas brought by these parties, etc. And I would like to emphasize that in the Czech environment, we know some studies from Czech, Jewish, British anthropologist Mr. Gellner, who emphasized how complicated it was for the Enlightenment to get through, and we can still see some city liberals and, on the other hand, what he called post-feudal obscurantism of the land regions. And we also have a nice study of Mr. Buzalka, a Slovak anthropologist, which emphasizes the fact that even if most of us are living within cities, we still have traditional anti-liberal concepts brought traditionally from this post-feudal environment. In the Czech environment, this might be representative in many movies or literary works, but I will not burden our foreign guests by movies that are sort of Czech classics. And why am I saying this? Because it's important to say it at the beginning. We live, and academia is the key actor, we live with the idea that humans are rational beings, but people often are not rational beings. They have their instincts, they're overwhelmed by emotions. And what is typical for populists is that they can very effectively, very quickly use an emotion, work with that emotion. And you know, there are strong emotions like the emotion of fear. And the way of using the migration crisis in 2015, so that's a key example of how they can work with the emotion of fear. Emotion of fear from change, any change. Everything is bad and it's been better already. That's something typical for the populists. I think in this sense, rational policy based on fact, so evidence-based policy, is at the losing end, and they must find different ways to communicate with the public. Another thing, it's been described, I will only describe it in different words. In the past 4 decades, we've been observing a significant transformation. In political science, it's called party de-alignment. Austria was one of the examples named for this case when the voters and party members left their parties. They didn't want to struggle to be recruited for political functions. They didn't want to be engaged in policy. And then there was space for political actors and movements that do not want to have any party members. They can do that on their own, using social media, based on business they have, based on their own financial means. Or there are those sofa parties. 3 people come together with a glass of wine and they agree, okay, we 3 will form a movement. There is a niche on the market. We can get 6% in the election. And this leads to a big frustration of the voters and also of making them insecure. And, you know, there is a strong demand for political parties. So within 3 months, I will establish a party, then I will make it into the government, then it will all break down, I will make another party. So this demand is also, on the one hand, it's rational because it shows that people want to change, they are not satisfied, but it's also very irrational because often they vote something that doesn't give any solution at all. I always tell to my students that policy is something like a patient, because one of the most frequent words in policy literature is remedy. We are looking for a remedy for anything, to improve something, to stop something, to make democracy more stable, more resilient, how to stop some process of political backsliding. But take yourselves as patients. We as patients often are irrational. I have been trying to put off some weight for 20 years, and yo-yo effect is a good friend of mine. So, you know, populism works the same. Where is the comparison? As if the physician tells you, okay, you are overweight, 20 kilos more, and overnight I will make you a slim athlete and you will be able to run a marathon. Just trust me and I will solve it for you within 1 week. What does that mean? Well, we have a technical polarization, left, right. We could also give it other names, like an ideological triangle between socialism, liberalism, etc., variances of cooperation. So we got to some affectionate polarization. Quite often, this is connected to instincts. I call it like a quasi-regional system, like a sect. A typical voter of Donald Trump saying, well, it's possible that he lies, but I still trust him. And I would say it's quite symptomatical. If the head of the Czech communists rejoiced that Donald Trump won the elections, because it shows the affection, it shows the irrationality. We have some leftist and rightist populists, but their character is very similar. In the Czech environment, I could point out there was a movement called Svatopluk, founded by Mr. Drulák, Professor Drulák. He says, in the cultural area we will be rightish, in the other things we will be leftish. It's like Sarah Wagenknecht, just the reverse. One of the key words I would like to emphasize here is the word that actors themselves use. It's sovereignism. It's the opposite of cooperation, opposite of a tendency to integration, opposite to the effort of finding common solutions. So it means you can criticize Brussels for not doing anything against migration, and on the one hand, you can tell that you will give no competencies, you will give no money for the European fight against migration. So this is right. And I did not name the previous Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. And this is important to say. There is the irrational component, and we need to work with it. But social media enable the bubbles. We are talking about new political tribes that are autonomous. They do not communicate with each other. Computer algorithms help in communication between them. They make it impossible to get information from outside of these tribes. So I was asked to talk about Central Europe. So what is typical of Central Europe, and I agree with Mr. Heffele very intensively, we can see a very intense and successful cooperation of Orbán, Janez Jančeves in Slovenia, and now Robert Fico in Slovakia, and without any doubt also Kichel. And they are very sufficient and very successful in using the post-communist history, fighting with the Western European demon and the demon of Brussels or others. And they say that they are the true Europeans, the carriers of traditions. And I think that what is really important is the cooperation of the opposite trend, of the rational policy, evidence-based policy. And here, the truth is that we need to consolidate the political mainstream on the European level, on the national level. We need to look for ways to a cordon sanitaire. We need to look for ways to greater political literacy, so that the voters vote according to a manifesto, a program, not according to having a personality telling them that there is an easy solution. And we need to get people to ask serious questions and to know that things are complicated and that they cannot be solved overnight, that there is prevention, that as if you are a patient, you need to take care of your body, and the same goes for policy. You need to take care for the environment where you are.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we give you the opportunity to ask questions from the audience, I would like to ask our speakers whether they would like to react to each other. Then Mr. Sobotka and then Mr. Hefele.
A small remark to Professor. You said people cannot act in a rational way and politics is not evidence-based. Sure. We had long time. We believed that political is always based on facts and evidenced facts. But we have to accept people cannot decide in a rational way. The Nymphenburg group, I mentioned it before. Think limbic means that our thinking of the 90s is wrong. That's only the neocortex is building your mind. You have the limbic system in you, and you have the spinal cord as well, the instinct able. And all together is always triggered by the limbic emotional system. And that we have to accept. And when you have it is, on one hand, that we know that there's always an emotional access, and you always need in the politics a narrative that you can transport your political idea. On the one hand, we see that the solutions for the complex structures isn't able to tell it in simple words. That's this equation we have to solve. And I think there's a lot of tools. We have tools. We should not be depressive. But we should really work on the ground, but in the second round. But I want to mention that because we thought always that people, we can reach them with a fact. And when you have the postmodernism, that a fact is not a fact. There's a truth is not truth. It's impossible to reach them. That we have to accept.
Děkuji.
Well, that goes exactly in my direction. You refer to the complexity, and that is the big challenge in political communication. You have to dramatically reduce, and this goes only with a story. Humans, what binds humans together anthropologically, it's stories. That's what makes us humans to some extent. And so often the denunciation of populism is not exactly precisely because even moderate democratic parties need a kind of populist narrative, and they need leadership. Well, that's not an issue against it. We had it in the past. Look to our own party history. We had brilliant people. They combined a kind of populist approach with leadership, and that works. So I'm not always completely against, and we too easily use these kind of terms before precisely looking what is really at stake and how could we do it better. Content matters, but this is, I think, the biggest challenge for moderate forces. We have to be able to deliver solutions and have the patience, by the way, because you both refer to the time dimension. That is the weak point of moderate forces. We do not promise tomorrow's solution. But we have to have a vision. We have to tell the people, there's a way, and you should go with us the way. I think that's the only way I can consider encountering populism.
Okay, I absolutely agree. This is what I mentioned at the beginning. What I lack in Europe is this, sense of being on the winning team, because all the time you have to keep justifying that it's a long way, that we will find a solution, and so on and so forth. Okay, my friends from the United States who are well educated and who know who Donald Trump is, but they still tell me that they vote for Donald Trump because, they say that they know that he will not handle migration, but that they trust that he is aware of this problem. This is maybe a bit naive, but I am trying to say that leadership is important. Identifying the problems, not avoiding the problems, and at the same time not giving space to other parties. Leadership is not bad. In the European history, we have had a lot of great leaders, from Churchill to Margaret Thatcher. And these were people who were good leaders. So I fully agree with you. Okay, and I would like to mention our publication again, because there's a connection between rationality and irrationality, and we have a great contribution by Zdeněk Rot on this very topic, and you are very welcome to read this part to get more information about disinformation, about all this which affects all of us. So if there are no other remarks from our speakers, I would like to ask the audience, do you have any questions? If so, please just raise your hand. Okay, there's a question at the back. And at the beginning, please always introduce yourself and then ask a question once you have received the microphone. Okay, so who was raising their hand? Okay, it's you. Thank you very much. My name is Roman Molek, and I have a simple question for all of you, or for any of you who feels like answering. Disinformation, that's an interesting topic. I'm fully convinced that we are at war with Russia when it comes to disinformation. And Russia is deliberately spreading disinformation in Europe. And by that, they are getting a certain kind of power. Let me give you an example. Slovakia. Because the public opinion in Slovakia is strongly influenced by disinformation. And by influencing the voters, you influence the political power and the executive power. So, is it still democracy if we allow another state influence the opinions of our voters? And if, in the end, as part of the democratic processes, parties come to power that are actually, favorable towards Russia, to those states that actually spread disinformation. So what is your opinion on that? Because I'm very skeptical about that. I think that Mr. Minister would definitely like to say something about that. But before he gets the microphone, I would like to add one thing. The basic problem is the institutional culture. Because we are, the problem is on our part. Let's look at how law works. The most lawyers will tell you that they are not able to define disinformation, and that's the end of it. And I'm saying this is not a legal question, it's a political question. The current government is reacting to this issue. We have some documents that say that Russia, Iran, China are clear opponents or even foes of our country, enemies of our country. Then there are certain governmental structures that are looking into these matters, but still, in my opinion, it's primarily about institutional culture. And this goes for media and also for the legal sphere and also for the academia. And last but not least, it's also about the civil society, because, you know, look at political education or civic education or anything of this kind, you know, any kind of prevention. If you do anything like that, you will be called, it will be called censorship. And we have a problem with that in the Czech Republic. And the legal aspects are very problematic from my point of view when it comes to this.
Má někdo další otázku?
Perfect, thank you. Are there any other questions? There is a reaction.
Is it possible to give you one question, Mr. Sobotka? I would like to ask you if we are now still in democracy, or if our democracy is very weak. Why? Is it on the cause is this is the populismus? And if is democracy in Austria or in German other as in Czech Republic? You speak about the cocktail, toxic cocktail. Thank you.
I think a small question to the first, as a small answer to the first question. I think, what is the difference between an online medium and a platform? It looks like a geese, it does like a geese, and it acts like a geese, but it was not treated like a geese. And that's the problem. We have to see that an online medium has really a redactor or an editor, and the platform has nobody. And you can spread all the disinformation, all the fake news, the deep fakes. When Europe, and it always belongs to one or two states. I do it since I was Minister of Interior, to fight for regulation for the digital platforms. I think it's one of the crucial moments. And it's also the second question, what are the dangers for the liberal democracy? We have a lot of threats. I think it's, on the hand, it's the digital structure, the fifth power in the state. And on the other hand, it's conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, it's really an attitude since 2000 years. It is always the same narrative. I worked together with a researcher of the Berlin Technical University, and she brought me the knowledge that the using of the phrases is since the 2nd century the same. It's the Jews are responsible for the world power, the vice of Zion, and this always have an influence. And the same narratives you have against Israel, against the Zionism, against the Jews here, and against all the supporters of the Jews. And therefore, and it's a mixture. It's a mixture, conspiracy, anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, Putin supporting. That's really a toxic cocktail, as I've seen. In the research, it's always the same. And the same people answer in the same manner. But I'm not really... I'm not depressive that the democracy cannot stand this development, because it's a third, or maybe 35% of the people. The others are really against, and they work really closely. We have to find the right tools for them. And that is first to be, as politicians, on the basics, in the towns, in the cities, in the small villages, to discuss with them. We have to find a new communication. We are only working on the phone or on the laptop or on the iPad. We have to come together to really explain our policy. It is possible, and we have seen it in the last election, where we have a member of parliament. He was very close to the people. He had quite a better result than in the other areas. It's different between the urban areas and the rural areas, but it is possible. The next thing is to be really honest, that people can trust you. Don't change politicians every 2 years. They have to follow a long way and to educate politicians. We have made a thought that we had a lot of politicians coming from outside. Political work is always to learn and to stand at your opinion. I was it for 42 years. And I had a lot of experience from the communal level to the federal level. And I think it's too long to express all the tools we have. But we didn't use in the past. We only read the headlines in the press, and we were oriented by them. And we have no time to explain to the people. And we need the time.
Let me just mention to the first question, unfortunately, democratic societies have to live with this paradox situation that they are always swinging beyond limitations and giving space, and the last thing we should do, give up what makes us different, and that's the open space of discourse, as distorted as it is through new methods, but we have to keep up, and I still believe that political culture is a strong remedy to keep it in a certain cage, I would almost say. So this thing is not lost. I fully agree with what Wolfgang mentioned. Very traditional ways of political communication, party works, are still absolutely crucial. We invested a lot in modern technologies, in modern communication strategies, but if I look into the empirical evidence, the old-fashioned interaction with people directly on the ground is still the most convincing and successful one.
Já si k tomu mohu jenom dodat.
If I may add, democracy, of course, it is still democracy. Democracy has a problem. It's now to the question, yes, from the question, it's to the question from behind the first question. There are many cases where democracy lost because of its advantages, because of democratic elections. Hitler won democratic election. Only then came the other story. So this is a big problem, and a solution like banning all the things we do not like, I think that would turn against us even more than we can imagine. Despite the fact, I think that there should be some regulation in some parts of discussion, even with the risk that we can influence something in Europe, not everything. Now I would take one social network, for example, when an American citizen is the owner and he supports that everyone can tell everything, no deletions, no erasions, so we can do nothing about this network. But I think there are some possibilities that we should consider. But we should not think that this will solve the whole situation. By banning some social media, we will not solve anything because a new will emerge. But if it's not social media, it will be something different. Social networks have been at power for 10, 12 years. What is the beginning of Facebook? Was it 2013, 2012? So we're talking about just 10 years. And that makes me bitter because I know that there will be new things coming, and at the same time, as it is when you're searching for a new medicine, for a new antibiotics. So with the development, as you develop new technologies, so beside, you have different algorithms, applications emerging that are able to detect this is not true, this is a fake news. So this is all that is ahead of us. We will all have to start using such technologies. And I would keep reminding of one thing which we cannot do without in the next decade, and we are losing years, which is from the kindergartens, from elementary schools, education, history, something that we forgot because we took it for granted. I remember the first book from political science. I didn't believe that these ideas will be good for me because that's clear. I took it for granted. That was Robert Dahl, I think, the critics of democracy. No, Democracy and Critics, that was the name of it. This is a book where the author, based on his lectures at the Yale University, I think that was where he was at that time, so he led a structured discussion. The one was an autocrat, the other person was an anarchist, the third one was, well, there were all possible models of governments that you can have. And he, as a Democrat, was trying, with difficulties, but in a very targeted way, to oppose. And of course, always in the conclusion in each of these dialogues. So it was always, despite democracy has such and such problems, so still the conclusion is that democracy is the only possible functioning solution. Great reading. I would never have thought that in 20 years I will still think about it like turning it into an application for children, because the things are not clear. At that time, when I first read it, I thought it's simple and easy and everyone would understand it. So I feel a bitterness because I fear it will be worse. But still, I cherish a hope that the same as when new medicine or antibiotic is developed, it takes some time and they use technology helps spreading. So the same technology might be used in a different way to protect from the spreading disinformation, but that would be for a longer debate.
Ráda, že k pacientu demokracie máme už rovnou i nějaké návrhy.
Okay, so I'm glad that we have some proposals how to cure these problems. But now I would like to ask you for further questions if you like. So again, please raise your hand and speak into the microphone, and feel free to ask in Czech so that we can translate that. My name is Petr Jeniška. I have been diplomat for many years and now I work as a journalist. I thought of speaking English, but as you insist on Czech, I will speak in Czech. I would like to mention one thing. We are talking about populism and sometimes it looks like the situation is hopeless, that the increase in populism is unstoppable. Look at Slovakia, Slovenia, France and Mrs. Le Pen. But we have a great example that populism can be beaten, and that is Poland a year ago. Donald Tusk. It would be worth it, you know, and you haven't mentioned Poland at all. Let's look into the Polish scenario a bit more into detail. What did he manage to do there? He won the election. The situation is still very complicated because this demagogical nationalism is still supported by 30% of the people. But Donald Tusk won the election in a democratic manner, and he didn't need any special tools for that. And this is a case that should be studied. And I would have a question for Mr. Sobotka and even for our minister. It's about social media and about the platforms. Mr. Sobotka talked about it a lot, and I think one point is clear. The populism of today is closely linked with online platforms. Without them, populism would look differently. And without them, populism wouldn't be as strong. So the question is quite simple. You are politicians. You have the power. You can make decisions. So what are you going to do? What are we going to do about it? Because we cannot keep talking about that theoretically only. And maybe one more thing. We know that classical media is all regulated, you know, TV, radios, newspapers, and so on. But there is no regulation in the online world. Plus, the social media always have an owner. Look at what Elon Musk has been doing, and that is something that I find scary because it's just one person who is one of the most influential people in this world, and Trump is courting him at the moment. So, thank you very much. Well, I think we have discussed that partly already during the previous talks. There is quite a few options. Well, a certain kind of responsibility and certain kind of regulation is something that is being discussed in Europe, and you know there's the idea of fines for the owner. But I'm not saying this is a necessity. If we do this, there will be something else that will pop up. Just like 10 years ago, we were not able to imagine that there would be so many social media with so much power. You know, so it would be naive to think that you can save democracy and fight fake news by introducing a certain law. No, that is not the case. Look at what is, you know, look at the development in terms of deep fake and what the AI can do today. You know, these things are scary.
I don't agree with you. I'm sad. The European Union tries with the Digital Service Act at first to make a special level for the digital informations. We have to see the freedom of speech is always the most important goal for all of us, that we don't want to control the personal opinion. But before the digital areas, and at the time, you had only the possibility to write a letter to a newspaper or to go to the Hyde Park corner and to address 300 or 400 people. Now we have the possibility with the post to reach millions of people. You mentioned Donald Tusk. I think it's the danger for the democracy, because you cannot decide it's wrong or not. And therefore we have to think about, neither you have an chief-redactor or an editor, you can accuse them, or you have a level that you see that's an information that is granted that is true or not, or you have a certain level that you know what's behind them. And this is without any alternative, because on the other hand, and we saw it in the time of COVID-19, a third of our population was in a bubble. They had information that was crazy. What they offered like a medicine, was have seen there. It's impossible to see that people can believe it. And that was not only not educated people, it was also an intellectual level. That mustn't you have always this special information. And therefore, when I started as Minister of Interior, my colleagues in Europe said, this is a little bit crazy guy from Austria. After then, when I was President of the Parliament, and I brought it in each conference, in every conference I was with this topic on the schedule. Then I said, yeah, you are right, but we have no solution. And that's the situation at the moment. I think the awareness is there that we have to do something. Because when you mentioned the algorithm, when you look that also the scientists are not able to detect the database behind the algorithm, how can it possible for a normal customer to see what is right and wrong and what can I trust? We have, I think, the most important currency in politics is to trust somebody. And when we can trust the media, what is to happen? I think we need a regulation, and we need a leveling. That's a marked. You have this leveling from goods in the natural. It's biotechnical produced, or it's pragmatic produced, or in such comparison. We have to look about it. I know that's also in the field of the research. It's a really serious concern.
But if I just may add, as Paradox said it, my son, I think we have to go back to very traditional forms of social interaction, because trust is not created in virtual space. It is talking to each other, following people over a long time. That's something we have underestimated, and we have to invest much more in these kind of old-fashioned interaction in politics as well.
Já se vrátím k té otázce Polska.
I will come back to the Polish question. That's a great positive example, and we would be able to find the another one when Zuzana Čaputová won over Robert Fico in the presidential election. So these are important examples showing us that democracy is still here, because without a democratic platform this might not happen. one problem which is not so dramatic in Poland, but I would see it as a problem for the future of Hungary. For example, Petr Magyar may win. These are those things left behind the current governments, like the Constitutional Court, and then to act accordingly as you need to act according to this institution that brings you into conflict with these values. And what will happen in Hungary, so that will be much worse because the system is so cemented that then you will not be able to move it in a legal way when changing hands, changing governments, and you will have to suppress legality when trying to change the system that has been there for some years. And it's important. I think Jan Werich, a Czech actor, says that a tree grows much slower than it's being cut. And to correct things which are wrong now will take a long term, and it will be hurtful, it will be hurting. Also, the conflicts with judicial power. In Poland, there are not so many, but in Hungary, after the election, I expect this to be a very dramatic problem. Thank you. I would like to thank you all for your answers, and now the time for a question. There are two raised hands at the back of the hall. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Pavlína Kopečná. I would like to ask you, do you still have the patience? Are you not angry? Because you look all very good. You've been here also in the previous regime, in this regime, you've been through the changes in the world. And I can see in my age what was the situation 10 years ago, and now the changes are much quicker. I think it is positive, but there are things which are complex, and it's really difficult to keep your patience. I try to vote parties that are evidence-based, that are telling the truth. But I have university education, and I am the first generation in my family. And I always need to explain that to the family members. What does it mean, what the government says? The problem is in the communication. You say it. The issues are complex, and people want to have quick solutions because they are looking for something which is easy in our complex and difficult times. So what do you plan to do about the communication, about explaining to the masses of people who decide based on emotions? They want easy solutions, and they do not understand what our government does. And I fear that the current government, even if they do correct steps, they have a bad communications. They do not explain them in connection so that normal people might understand it. So that's probably why they will lose in the election next year, and we will be getting back to the cycle, to the circle. I can see a way in education, but education would need a lot of money, and that's an unpopular decision. So how can you get support to do it? Thank you. Petr Mucha. I had a very similar question. Maybe I was more critical. I fully agree with what has been said, the problem of disinformation, social media, etc. But we can not only blame these sides of the coins. The problem is also that we lose the fight with the populists by not communicating, because they are doing much more in this direction. They're going more to the people, and it's a failure of this government, of the current government. The communication is missing there. So I'm asking, what can you do for that? Because when Mr. Rakusan, the minister, tried to go to the region to talk to the people like a populist, but in a cultivated way, he was hated by his coalition partners. But I think there is no other way than getting among the people, talking to them. So that's why I would like to ask you, what do you want to do for this? Well, I would just give you an easy answer by saying, yes, I agree with you. Communication is a problem of the current government, and it stands in the way of persuading the voters, because I'm convinced that there are many steps, as you said, many steps that the government did in a correct way, but they just are not able to explain that in a simple way. For 3 years, they have been dealing with that. 3 years, I've been a member of the government. Since then, they improved in some ways, but I think that they still didn't do the big step. And if they cannot improve themselves, then the thing will happen, as you said, in the next elections. And I can tell you openly, everyone in the government is aware of the fact. I'm talking seriously now. The question is, however, what approach they will take, because the last year of the term is the most important. As a member of the parliament, I was criticizing my government for not being able to communicate well. I'm among those who supported that strategic communication, talking about whether this is enabling the opposition, using it as some political momentum, but then we succeeded in a way, and I'm grateful for that, because I know what the resistance was at the beginning. I do not want to tell you that I'm glad now that all the government members are now not in point 0 now, they are in point 1 now. It means they are aware of the existence of disinformation. I still remember the discussions when we had to convince other members that it really is an existent threat, that disinformation is here. So I'm not talking about the strategic framework. I can see many positive changes. Strategic communication under 14, that is a good thing. That's the beginning. But if we do not go stronger for it, then the result will be what I mentioned at the beginning. If you lose or if you win, it must be always two sides. And if the one loses or wins, so it means the other also acted. Can I also respond from the political science point of view? What was typical for the political parties was that they were mass parties. And I'm sort of an outsider, sometimes an invited friend when coming to the government, and I observe how it works. They work from 6 a.m. till midnight, they are never at home, and I ask, when do they have time to go to stadiums to communicate with people? And that's the problem. You do not have a mass party with 200,000 members, those members getting to a pub and over beer explaining that to the people. So my party does it like that. That's their intention. So this is what you do not have anymore. That was one key factor of civil society. Political party as an actor, communicating the party manifesto, communicating the behavior of the party. And now it's only up to a narrow range of people who then have to use media as a tool to communication. But you surely could see how two politicians discuss. You invite one from the opposition, one from the government. They are screaming at each other for 1 hour, moderator ignoring it, and he's just happy that there will be more audience, more people watching it. So this is connected to the fact that we do not have the traditional normal policy, which would be communicative, that would be from the grassroots, where everyone would have their own persuasion. They do not have to bear it written on their heads which political party they vote. But it was quite common that they knew it. They knew it about their neighbor, and it was quite normal for everyone to be rightist or leftist. So if you support democracy, that was a natural, and also the alternations were natural. I think this is what we lack. And when we do not get back to a policy being based on the interest of the public to be interested in policy, then we cannot move on anymore.
Oh, thank you very much. As a political scientist and a politically active person, I fully understand and fully agree with what has been said. Now we only have time left for 2 last questions, so please, those of you who are raising their hands. Good evening, Jan Bitnárek. I have a question. What is the responsibility, or how important is the responsibility of politicians and voters for politics in general? Are there any limits for politicians as to how the development of democracy can be influenced? And can democracy be saved by politicians only? Or do we need another approach by the voters to change something? Okay, there was one more question over here. Good evening, Martin Liška. Well, I would like to maybe change the name of this discussion, and the question would be, are we more or less resilient in Central Europe? And then another question, can this be related to the communist history of our societies? Because we have had 40 years of communism, then we have 2 representatives of 2 different countries with a slightly different history. And then another question, when it comes to this post-feudal obscurism, do we have a stronger tendency towards this development than, for example, the northern countries in Europe? Okay, I will probably grab the microphone again. To answer the first question, it's quite simple. Half a year ago, I said on the radio that democracy is a system where you have the right to elect a stupid guy. And that is your right. That's democracy. That's your decision that cannot be challenged or restricted. So I'm really convinced as a political scientist that politics is based on our society. Of course, politics tries to influence society as well. And that's, again, a question of political culture. It's about how you react to certain situations. You, as a politician, how you behave in a certain situation. You know, in a certain country, you would resign in a situation, but in this country, you do not resign. But again, this all is based on the situation in the society, because you have politicians here who lie from the morning till the evening, who really are populists, who have been convicted of lying, of abusing data or fabricating data, but still such a politician still is supported by 30% of the voters. This tells you something about the society in general. Then the other question. Well, I don't know if it's really true what you said, because if you look at Estonia, there has been a certain development, and the development is very different from other countries. So it's about individual choices. Okay, we have been uprooted as society, of course. You know, look at Sudetenland in Bohemia and Moravia. These are still regions that are not doing well. And this is a similar situation to the new Bundesländer in Germany. And, you know, there's a lot of factors that influence this. Very often it depends on politicians, on political leaders from these areas, from these regions. And it depends on their decisions, the way they behave. And here we could look at the Baltic countries, which could, you know, be a good example. In other countries, politicians are able to agree on complicated issues. But this is not what is happening in the Czech Republic. And it's, again, something that is typical for the Czech Republic and for Slovakia, for example. We have a lot of polarization here because we have 2 types of political culture. A civic or civil political culture and a parochial political culture, where you actually want to have a strong guy who will take care of everything, so that you as a citizen don't have to take care of anything.
And something politicians normally don't like an excuse in advance. We have also to talk about the limitations of politics. I think it's a development, at least in Western European countries, in the post-war area, that the state, the parties grow, they took responsibility for each and everything. By this, they diminished also alternative forces, alternative settings, institutions in the society, which they never could replace, basically. So this is one of the side effects we have also to acknowledge. And in this gap between what they promised and what expectations could be fulfilled, this is the space where populism entered very precisely. So we have to talk also about limits, what politics has to do, and not other institutions.
Well, democracy, as I see it, is not only a possibility to choose, but it's also about responsibility. And that means responsibility for the politicians and for the voters. And the politicians are responsible for what they do, and they are responsible for the people who they represent, but they also have a responsibility that if they mess up what they do, then they will put other people off from going into politics, from being active as politicians, because everybody will just think of themselves, of benefiting from one legislative period, and then it has been it. And, you know, then people will keep saying that politics is basically dirty business, and that politicians are not really active, that they are not acting on behalf of people. This is where I see the responsibility of politicians. And at the same time, when you look at the voters, they have a choice. If they decide that that certain politicians let them down, and that's why they don't want to go to the next election, that's their decision. That's their responsibility again, if they don't come to the election.
I think democracy cannot be saved only by the politicians or by the members of parliament. I think it's a holistic desire of our society. It starts in the family, it comes to schools, it's in our companies, it's everywhere. I think all our decisions are based on a democracy and the access to democracy. And I think we cannot solve the human rights without democracy. It's based on us. And it's the liberal democracy I have to mention. On the other hand, we see a lot of threats, and my last remark will be that we have a lot of tools, and this is quite different from country to country. It's different from region to region. When we solve, or when we have the serious interest to solve the migration policy and the integration, must be not the same in Czech Republic, but in Austria, in several parts, it's the main issue. And when we solve the problems from people, the costs of living, it's coming from the housings to the goods. When we have really interest to be close to them, to discuss with them, then I see that we are better than the populists. Then what was my experience of the election campaign? When we discuss with populists, when they, with their arguments on the end, they leave the room. They're not really able to discuss. They don't want to discuss. They have their own truths, and they're not really to challenge their truths. And that's could be really the big challenge on one hand, but the opportunity for the conservatives and for the People's Party to be attractive for people, because I think all the politicians they are here on the floor are really serious and concerned to make the things for people better and going on, and that we should estimate on one hand. And therefore I have to be thankful for the invitation I've mentioned that before, and therefore many thanks to TOPAZ for the invitation and for the good organization and for Martens Institute. I think when we cooperate in this sense, it's our duty to bring more spirits to people, and it's really an example. I wish that this could be take place in all the communities in Czech Republic.
Já moc děkuji.
Thank you very much for the supportive words. Thank you very much for the supportive words at the end. I would like to say thank you to Marek Ženíšek, to Wolfgang Sobotka, to Petr Hefele, and to Ladislav Cabada. And I would also like to say thank you to all the three institutions, Politische Academy, TOPAZ, and Wilfried Martens Centre for European Studies, for making this discussion possible. I would like to say thank you to the entire team that has worked on this project. That means Mrs. Eva Šafránkova, Sandra Stenberg, and Matthias Weiss from the Political Academy, and also to all the authors of our publication, and as well to all of you for coming here, for being interested, for sharing our efforts to support democracy and to make sure that our democracy remains healthy for as long as possible. Thank you very much for coming, and I would like to invite you to have some refreshments with us here. You can have a discussion with all of us, with all of our speakers. Let's talk about our views on what we can do to support our democracy, to make it a bit stronger every day, and to make sure that the threats that are ahead of us become smaller. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening, and see you next time.